right.
It's just so you have to put that on the link.
That was a little bonus. That was actually the secret Easter egg. If you click on the sponsorship link, you get a little sneak preview of that. Obviously, it's not directly related to the news as such, but it is an example of sponsorship, right? And it is an example of what we talked about, those of us that were here, about how in the early days of radio and television, shows tended to be sponsored by one key sponsor who would, extract all kinds of liberties from the show. Either the star of the show, in this case, or we watched John Wayne. John Wayne did the camel cavalcade of news, right? That was John Wayne. So in this case, it's Fred Flintstone. He's the lead guy in the show, and so it's up to him to, hawk the product that they're sponsoring. So,
how much money does that cost to be on the Flintstones?
Okay, can you just all in your? I see some people have already started to write down. But you write down advertising, right? Second, Liz, shut your laptop and open up your journal. No, sorry, get a piece of paper. That's it. Second is I needed your general knowledge quiz stuff that you had done it all on men, remember? And you're like, and you guys were supposed to have handed that in last week before soccer, right? So I marked everyone who's done it and I put it in their box. Today you're going to hand in is the news managed. What's really important is that you have to stop the handout, the PDF about like.
We already handed that in.
Okay, so some people did, some people didn't. I'm just saying that you have to stop. As I saw, Kate and Allison doing their notes on the train for hours and hours and hours, which was really too much. Yeah. When I give you readings, you need to stop at 45 minutes, and then you come in and you say, this is where I got to. So we can start to have a conversation about how to make it faster, because that's one of the key things that we're teaching you in this class, about how to create a shorthand, how to become able to see the main points from large amounts of text, especially when you're going to be doing research. This is really important. So you do not continue past 45 minutes. You stop, you come and see me, and then I try and give you some help. And we're going to be talking about that news management today. I'm going to be giving them back next class. Your tests have all been pushed back one day, so your tests are not going to be on Tuesday anymore. They're going to be on Thursday, and we'll talk about them more next class. Yes.
I don't know what the general knowledge quiz is. The thing where like you have to find
The women, women, not black women. No, developing world women. Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
Okay, yeah. I was sick today with you that you were supposed to have that in, and then you were gone. You were gone the next day, and then.
But you still put in the box. And also, Miss Sarakova, Eva brought the article that you. Do you want to talk about the article, the Czech article?
Right now? Okay, sure. So as we've talked about the elections and who won. The second person, who will probably now be in the government, is an owner of a lot of newspapers and a publishing company. And this magazine is not his, it's somebody else's. But there's a brilliant article about the Czech TV. So for the Czech speakers, I'll scan this, and we already sent it out, but it was really bad quality. So I'll scan it and send it out again. It's about bias and what the Czech TV, which is actually, how is that paid?
It's from the taxes.
So it's public, right? And how they are biased and what stories they choose to show and what stories they don't show. It's really, really interesting, and I recommend it. So I'll scan this.
And actually, if you were to open that article on Google Translate on Google Chrome, wouldn't that
well,
can you
it's
maybe look
not.
and see?
It's behind the paywall.
Ah.
So that's why if we scan it, you cannot put it in the Google Translate.
Okay. Okay. So advertising now. We're gonna make some points here. Shut your laptop there, Teddy. Yeah. Oh, we got a journal. Yay. Okay.
For those of you that were here, a lot of this is going to be a little bit of review, because we kind of talked about it as it came up. So when we talked about newspapers, we kind of covered the impact of advertising.
How many of you were not here last week?
Most people were here.
Last week.
I have
was
clear
sick
recollections of this being a pretty good group, actually.
Yeah. Okay.
I was sick on Tuesday. Does that matter?
Which maybe
No, then you weren't
maybe I'm remembering things incorrectly.
Well, you weren't here.
Very possibly, actually.
Alright, okay.
So, anyway, some of this stuff is going to be review, but if it's not review, if you missed it the first time, good for you, we're going to cover it again. So, just to summarize advertising, right? It's really important, if you don't understand anything else about media, you must understand how important advertising has been to the evolution of media. That is a pivotal thing to understand. Right from the earliest days of newspapers, like 1836, French newspaper La Presse, which still exists, was the first newspaper to include paid advertising anywhere in the world. It allowed them to lower the price of what it would cost to buy newspapers so more people could read La Presse. And it was so successful that soon pretty much every newspaper in the entire universe began to copy that model.
So I see people taking notes, and I see some people not doing taking notes. So I think you should be taking notes of main points that are on the screen, as well as what you hear Mr. Peters and Ms. Scher say.
You know, so all of the various different forms of media would not exist without the influence that advertising had on their evolution. The earliest days of radio was all brought to you by, you know, Winston cigarettes and things like this. The earliest television shows were the same thing. And then right up into the modern era, Google is not a search engine. Google is an advertising company, primarily. That's where they make the vast majority of their money. So even the internet has been entirely sort of, the twists and turns of how the internet has evolved has a lot to do with the influence that advertising has played. The other big players, Facebook. I mean, Facebook too, the vast majority of the money that they make comes from advertising revenue. So you really have to understand how important advertising was to this whole process. So, we talked about sponsorship, the earliest days, single sponsor, title sponsor, pretty much pays the bills for the entire show. Winston cigarettes for Flintstones, the Camel Cavalcade, this type of thing. Virtually every show back in those days had some sort of title sponsor, or perhaps a short list of sponsors. Usually it wasn't how it is today, and how it is today is that advertisers buy whole blocks of time. You don't just see commercials associated with one particular show, you see them throughout the schedule, right? So you'll see, you know, advertisements, the similar advertisements coming on morning, noon and night against all kinds of different shows. Okay, that's a bit of a change since the 1950s. That's when that really started.
If any of you see Mad Men, like that's what Mad Men was about, like advertising agencies now like deciding what they're going to do. Yeah.
Yeah, well, I mean, I don't know exactly what this is, but I always know that back in the U.S., like in the summer, if you just watch TV all day, you see the same,
Hypothetically speaking.
you see the same commercial, like, for Neutrogena coming out all day long.
Neutrogena all day long during the week because it's soap operas that stereotypically women watch, right?
Yeah.
So men are not going to be like the demographic for Neutrogena, right?
Right.
It's really annoying when you're watching a movie and then like when it's like a really good part and you're really excited, then it stops in advertising.
Right. Because they want you to stay. They want you to stay, watch the ads, and hang in there for the movie.
Exactly.
Look, with block advertising, we see advertisements for various brands throughout the schedule, but there's no joke that they try to target certain demographics. So you're going to see the Neutrogena in the middle of the day with the sort of daytime television. Or the example I keep using just because it hits home for boys, tampon advertising, right? As soon as it comes on, a man's reaction is to shut it off, or to go somewhere else, or to cover our ears and pretend.
It's talking about something about a big black box.
Right, let's just pretend. That might not have been the words I would have chosen, but, you know, it's all good. Anyway, men want to cover their ears and run away and pretend the whole thing doesn't exist, right? So obviously, if you're going to put that stuff on television, which they do, I'm sure you've all noticed, you're going to try and put it on shows that women tend to watch. Now I'm not going to generalize like that and say no women watch sports and it's all entertainment. I'm not going to say that. But advertisers do say that. They study these things very, very closely and they try and figure out who is watching what when. Now that used to be hard, and we'll talk about that in a minute, to figure out who is watching what when. But of course today, it's really, really easy because Google knows everything about you, pretty much. So when you are online watching a certain movie or out on a certain website, there's a pretty good chance they know that you are either a male or a female. Pretty much guaranteed. That is one bit of information that they probably know, just because of your surfing habits, okay? So, boys, this is the reason why you're not getting banner ads about, you know, feminine hygiene products or, you know, the latest yeast infection remedies. I mean, we don't get those advertisements. Thank goodness. It's one of the benefits of personalized advertising from Google, right?
Wait, I get
Target audience matters, right? And whether it's a newspaper, the New York Times, is supposedly an upscale newspaper where more wealthy people are inclined to read it. So Rolex advertises with the New York Times. They don't advertise in USA Today because USA Today has like a grade 5 reading level. So, I mean, it is. And so advertisers go to certain places to advertise to certain people. And that's important to recognize. Product placement. This doesn't necessarily directly relate to the news because it's more common on television and in fictional movies. Something we talked about this morning, the James Bond movies are a huge example. Everything in that movie is product placement. Yeah. The Rolex watch.
The cars.
It used to be James Bond would only ever drive British cars for the longest time. Aston Martins usually or whatever. The last couple movies though, he's driving a BMW. Yeah. That isn't because James Bond is suddenly German. It's because BMW has more money to pay the sponsorship. And so their awesome car makes it ahead of Aston Martin's awesome car. That's the way things are. Yeah.
I don't know why I remember this, but I do. I always remember in Transformers 2, the entire movie he's wearing his New York t-shirt.
Yeah. No, well, there's a good reason why you remember it, because he was wearing it throughout the movie, and I'm sure the logo was put in just such a way so that you could see it. That's why he did it. Yeah, so there's lots of stuff like that. The one news example I always like, if you watch Fox and Friends in the United States on the Fox News Network, in the morning, the three of them are sitting around the table talking news, but they're all holding a Starbucks coffee in their hand with the label pointed forwards. And sometimes they'll even talk about, wow, this is a really great mochaccino or whatever. Oh no, really, they actually do this while they are presenting the news.
That's so sad.
Does this distract away from the news? I don't know, maybe it does.
I saw this movie where there was this comedy movie, and in the middle of the movie they said that they ran out of budget for the movie.
Yeah.
So then one of the characters in the movie turns to the other and he says, what are we going to do? We can't shut down this movie. So they go to product placement, and the rest of the movie, they're wearing like bathrobes with giant Coca-Cola signs, and they literally like make it really obvious, like they get a can of Pepsi and they go.
Yeah, Wayne's World does that. Wayne's
Oh
World.
yeah,
Wayne's
it was,
World.
but it was also
Right?
another one.
Wait, okay. So can I just make a connection to the news part though? Is that how does this affect the news? Is that if Starbucks is the sponsor of Fox and Friends, he thinks that Fox and Friends is going to do a negative story about the fact that Starbucks doesn't use fair trade coffee or that the labor practices that they're using? No, because Starbucks is their sponsor. So please write down is that you start to pay attention to who is funding, and you say that's part
They're
of
not
the news
objective to
effort.
all
Which companies are advertising on the medium? And then you start to pay attention to, they're not really saying anything negative about those companies, right? So that is how advertisers affect the news, because if they're paying, and this is what Ms. Rodlingova, you can talk to her about when she used to work in a paper, and they couldn't do stories against people who were advertising on their paper. And talk about the company thing.
Yeah, and the tricky part about it these days especially, and then we'll get to your comment there of it. The tricky part these days is that corporations, like a good example is Procter & Gamble, they're a big like housewares company in the States, one of the biggest companies in the entire world. They sell thousands of different products. They sell Colgate toothpaste, Tide detergent, and a million things in between. So you get these gigantic corporations that advertise thousands of different products, and suddenly, you're not worried about offending one little, a plumber on the corner. And oh no, he's not going to advertise with us anymore. You're talking, one company might spend millions and millions and millions and millions of dollars on advertising. So if you make them angry, you're not just losing one commercial for one product. You're losing thousands of commercials for thousands of products, and that can be a real problem. So you can't report necessarily harshly about Procter & Gamble. Or if you think of these other gigantic companies, these massive companies, Time Warner owns like 5 television studios. All these car companies, all these car companies, right? One powerful car company owns like 10 car brands. So if you make General Motors angry, you're also losing, what's the Italian company? You're losing Fiat advertising. You're losing, Skoda advertising, because they're all tied together under one corporate banner. So it becomes really difficult to report on corporate issues, and there are a lot of them. That's one of the most important things in the news is how companies behave. Whether it's McDonald's making us fat or Budweiser making us drunk or whatever, what companies do, how they behave is a really important issue. And if you can't cover it, you're really, you're overbound. Eva's been waiting.
Yeah.
Yes, sorry.
I just want to know that not in this. There's not only the one about the TV, but before it, it's a big thing. It's 10 pages long, and they actually talk not about advertising, but about the fact that if Babish owns the media, they just can't write anything about it.
Well, sometimes it's very direct like that,
Yes,
right?
and also they say if they own it, usually it's not what you see or what they write, but what they don't write about.
Right, it's what they choose not to cover.
Yes.
It's not that they are, the article they do publish may seem balanced, but they've just left a lot of the other information out. And depending on what country you're in, this can be really direct. Like in Russia, Vladimir Putin directly controls a lot of the press. He owns some of the press conglomerates. And there are other government conglomerates that are under government control. In Italy, Silvio Berlusconi, although they do report lots of things against him, but he owns a whole newspaper and a television channel. And he was the president. So how does that work exactly?
So we should move on.
Yeah, absolutely.
I'm
Absolutely.
just emailing you out right now, Eva. I'm just emailing you out right now the 10 corporations, you can look at it after, that control almost everything you buy. So it's showing you the Procter & Gamble so that you guys see the power that those advertisers have over what goes in the media. So I'm just sending that.
So in the modern world, everything is melding together, right? Nobody just advertises on television or just creates an advertisement on the radio or just does a media ad. These are all like they're multifaceted attacks. One advertising agency will coordinate a multimedia ad explosion that crosses all of the different medias. There'll be some newspaper ads, there'll be some magazine ads. It's about developing a corporate brand, not just on the television, but generally speaking, out in the world, there's probably some guerrilla marketing, Twitter, social media, this type of thing. So these days, advertising is very integrated across all the different media. All right. Very, very briefly, determining value of an ad. So this is also stuff we reviewed a little bit, right? So drive time, that's radio, right? That's the time of the day everybody's trapped in the car. Advertising on radio at that time of day is more expensive because of that. There's a bigger audience. The equivalent for television is called prime time, as we also discussed. It's probably 6 o'clock in the evening, starting with the 6 o'clock news, to 10 o'clock news, and then everybody goes to bed after that. Between those two periods of time, it's the most valuable real estate on television, and all the ads are consequently much more expensive during that time.
I forgot to tell us branding, which is important.
No, we mentioned that. Yeah, just
Did you say brand?
Mm-hmm.
Oh,
developing brands across. Yeah.
Sorry, I missed it because I was looking. Sorry. So you talk about branding. Right now, Mr. Peters' presentation has 2 brands. And Mr.
Right.
Peters and his presentation have 2 brands. What's the brand?
ISP,
ISP, right?
Nike.
ISP is super, and Nike is a super big brand, right? So
Yeah, and look, Nike's a good example of, Nike's a great example of a corporation that also creates news. Not so much these days, but maybe 10 years ago, they got into a lot of trouble because they were using sweatshop labor and child labor to manufacture their clothes and their shoes.
There's a link to the corporation I talked to you about.
That's
talks-
news, right? When companies do stuff like that, that's news. And you imagine to yourself, Nike is also one of the biggest marketers in the world. Especially back in those days, that was right in the heat of Air Jordan. When Nike was one of the biggest advertisers in the world. And this scandal comes along, and you imagine your television station makes millions of dollars off Nike advertising.
This is the thing we read in class, right? That it was
You know?
criticizing Nike at the time.
Does Nike pick up the phone and say, don't cover this story or we'll pull our ads? Maybe not. But do they think to themselves, uh-oh, if we cover this Nike story, we're going to be screwed. And then people self-censor because they don't want to lose the money. So it may not be an issue of Nike picking up the phone and saying, if you cover this story, we're never going to advertise with you again. It's, people self-censor. Okay.
Yeah, sorry.
So we got drive time, we got prime time. We talked about prime space, particularly where newspapers are concerned. So where is prime space on a newspaper by review? Whereabouts?
Above the fold.
Above the fold on the front cover, right? Because you see it when it's presented on the newsstand or in a newspaper machine or wherever, or when people are reading, which makes the other valuable real estate on a newspaper the back cover, because you become a walking billboard when you're walking around or sitting on the bus with the thing open. So prime space matters too. We already dealt with target audience, but advertisers will pay premiums to get the audience they want. You want men from 18 to 35, you're going to pay extra to advertise on NFL football time. The obvious example, Super Bowl, the most valuable sports advertising property in North America, by a long shot, probably the world, possible exception of the World Cup. Advertisers pay millions and millions of dollars to advertise for just 1 minute on the Super Bowl. People tune in just to watch the commercials. That's how crazy the Super Bowl.
That's part of the Super Bowl.
I know. And it's a constant source of annoyance to Canadians because we try and watch the Super Bowl in Canada, but they sell different ads to Canadians than they do to Americans, so we don't even get the good advertisements. We get the boring football without the good advertisements. So it's constant annoyance for Canadian football fans.
T-Bone, you want to say?
What I also notice is that one time you get this new advertisement and it's long, and then through a
keep
period of
chopping
time they keep on chopping parts off until at the end it's half the time that it was before.
Because obviously you pay for the length of advertisements.
Yeah.
So after a certain point, it makes more financial sense. And also, once people have seen the advertisement a million times, you don't have to play the whole thing because the thing is kind of in your subconscious already. You just need a 15-second reminder, and then people play out the rest of the ad in their head.
Some Google commercials, like for Pepsi, they use celebrities.
Yeah.
Because they get more money from that.
Oh yeah. Oh
If you
yeah.
have
Celebrity
like
endorsements.
Beyonce, she was last year.
Yeah. Musicians these days, they're always complaining that record companies take all of the money for the recordings that they make. Most celebrities make the vast majority of their money off of endorsements.
That's a goal too, right? That's he's spending all of his time doing endorsements instead of paying attention to football, right? That's a goal too. He's in Real Madrid, right? That's where.
Oh,
And
yeah.
he has his agents, and that's what Entourage is all about.
And his wife lets him go back to the kids too.
Yeah.
So back to what we were saying
Yeah.
before, and even now with the celebrities, if all these major 10 companies own every little brands, and then they buy more, and then in the future there's maybe gonna be 5 big ones, and the news won't be able to report on any big issues. Then it'll be more like music, like Miley Cyrus record involved on the CNN website.
I think we're already seeing that, and it's
Yeah,
it's funny you should mention Miley Cyrus in the CNN website because we're right about to read
Okay,
just
so
that very
a
thing.
big story that
There was
happened
a
yesterday
thing
was that U.S. Airlines bought American Airlines, and actually I'm an American Airlines cardholder. So the monopolization of American Airlines safety features, right? This is very, very, very important. And American Airlines is then owned by some of those corporations, right? So it has alliances with these people. So that's where it gets into safety, right? That if these big corporations then own the newspapers and aren't going to report if something's wrong with a wing or a landing gear or something else like that. And that's what Pulitzer was about, which is what you read about last night, is that you want to have people who are going to expose wrongdoing in high places, but if those newspapers are owned by the same companies that keep on merging and merging and merging, then that's not going to happen exactly as you said, Nicole. Yeah.
Weren't we supposed to stop at Pulitzer? It said that.
Yeah. But that's the main point is that, then we'll talk about this later. Yeah.
Sure.
We'll get to this.
So just real briefly, when we're talking about ratings and who's reading and who's watching, for print and broadcast, for print, we're newspaper and magazines, we're talking about circulation. Circulation, what that means basically is how many newspapers you print. That's the circulation. Every week, the New York Times on a Wednesday prints 1 million newspapers. That's their circulation. That's a different number than the paid circulation. You can print as many newspapers as you want. I can tell you, if you've ever worked in a newspaper or whatever, at the end of the week, almost guaranteed, there are going to be newspapers left over. Depending on where you're at, maybe lots, maybe tons go into the recycling bin. So how many you print, that's an interesting number, but advertisers want to know who's actually reading. So one thing they look at is paid circulation. How many subscribers do you have that pay money to read your newspaper? Not people who pick it up on the bus or get it at McDonald's when somebody else has finished dripping their special sauce all over it. How many people have actually paid to read the newspaper? That's an important number, right? Advertisers want to know that. And then there's this other number of readership. How many people actually read the newspaper? And that number is probably going to be higher than the paid circulation because people share newspapers. You get them in public places and things like that.
Like a bake shop, right? They have
Yeah.
a Guardian, so many people read it.
Look, this number is hard to get at. This is all just an estimate. There are advertising geniuses out there with sophisticated algorithms to try and figure out the relationship between paid circulation and readership. But traditionally with paper newspapers, there is no precise number. It's impossible to know, really. You can't know that number. It's just how many people read the newspaper. Who knows?
But can I just say, can you add this though, is that people have been saying for a while the death of the newspaper, right? Because circulation and paid circulationship and readership numbers have been going down and down and down because of the internet, right? And so an example of the death of the newspaper is the Prague Post. So the Prague Post, which has been around since before the Velvet Revolution, it's been the expatriate English language newspaper to go to in the Czech Republic. That last July, its readership was going down, its subscriptions were totally going down, so it just said, forget it, we're just going to go all online. And now, it's like, I just went to the site right now, they're redoing the site, and it's always like behind, like when I've been paying attention to it now. And for myself, I always picked up a copy at Albert, and then when they stopped having them, I forgot to look at the website, and then I feel like really out of touch, so I was embarrassed when Mr. Rakova knew the Czech election results and the updates, and I was like, normally I'd be like this, because like George Mazzotti in our other class said, oh, I like to read the hard copy rather than skim the news. Me too. When he goes to England, when he goes to England with his grandparents have a subscription to whatever. And that's the same as me, and I felt like, oh. So, but it is the death of the newspaper, and Ms. Scher had a story also about, like, some of these people's subscriptions, they paid for them and they didn't know that the newspaper had stopped printing them.
Right, we paid for them just at the end of last year, kind of over the summer, with the idea they would be here in the school this year. We bought 3, and nobody told us that they had stopped printing. They just stopped arriving, and we had to follow up and call them, and they said, oh yeah, here you go, you've got 3 subscriptions online, and they give me 3 usernames and passwords, which are kind of ridiculous at that point. And they missed the whole point of what we were hoping, which is anybody who's in one of the teachers or staff lounges could pick it up and read it as they needed. Almost nobody is going to the site to log in and utilize it. So for me, paying for 3 of them was an immediate waste of money, because 1 login is all I need, and 1 login isn't meeting the needs of what we had, but I paid the money. So it's a frustration, that transition, what that's going to mean to people and how that's going to be used is very different.
I just need to also say, please write Newsweek died. Newsweek stopped, its last print issue was in December of 2012, and it went bankrupt. It went all online, and it filed for bankruptcy this summer. So, because people just weren't going online. Newsweek and Time Magazine are the 2 biggest American news magazines that there are, Time and Newsweek.
It re-exists. We bought print publication.
It exists, but it's in bankruptcy court right now. So because people weren't going to the website. My friend had a subscription. She goes, I never look at it online.
Newsweek is more popular than People.
It's
More
different.
popular?
People is like popular culture. Sorry, we want to like push on to save your questions, write them down, and we'll get them at the end. Yeah.
Okay, so what circulation is to print media, ratings are to broadcast media. And you've probably heard this before. Your favorite show gets canceled. Why? The ratings were low. What does that actually mean? Nielsen ratings in the United States, it's a company that does it. There are various kinds, but they're the big one. Nielsen, what they do, basically, now this has changed with technology over time, but the long and the short of it is they put a box, like a cable box, attach it to your television, which records what you do on your television. What does the kids do? What shows do the kids watch in the show? What shows do the adults watch, the men watch, the women? And so as you work your remote control, it keeps track of what you're watching. That is a sample. If you know anything about statistics, you take a small sample, and then from that you extrapolate what you think the ratings are nationwide. This week in the United States is what's called November Sweeps Week. You probably hear it. All the good shows put all their good episodes and all the cliffhangers and all that stuff, that all comes on this week. And the reason that they do that is that this is the last week that they count 2013 ratings. They're starting to figure out what the advertising rates for 2014 should be. So this is the last week to bump the ratings up before they stop calculating for this year and start making plans for what the prices are going to be for next year. So all this week, they're trying to pad their statistics by having all these great shows that billions of people watch so that they can inflate their rates for next year.
What about shows like when Pretty Little Liars? They had a Halloween special, and then they go on like a they always
So because there are other times of the year when it is, but this is the end. This is the last week, so this is why it's a big
they're on
push.
break right now, so they.
But
that's
they,
also a
and
big
they do
enough
different
show.
networks. Different networks have different things. HBO and
Well, and
Netflix
also there are
and,
different. This is more traditionally how it was done.
That's AMC,
These days, with pay TV like HBO, a lot of the greatest shows are coming out of HBO, which is a pay network. which is less about advertising because viewers are paying them directly for their shows. So stuff like that, Game of Thrones and stuff like this, they don't follow Sweep Sweep quite as much because it's less about advertising for them, right?
Please let me write down, there's, because of ratings, there's been a collapse of television news as well. Because if you look at the numbers of people watching, review or, things that are not news related, and then you look at the news broadcasts, not as many people are watching them. So this is why if you watch How I Met Your Mother, right, Robin was always doing these stunts as a news broadcaster to get people to watch her on television, right? And so in Czech Republic, we have Nova, where you have the naked weather girl, right? So, and as Mr. Peter says, she's a serious meteorologist, right? But so Ms. Rakova, how does she work? How does it work?
So it worked as she would start in her underwear, and then she would gradually dress herself according to the weather next day, and it was after 10, and it stopped like 5. No,
And then she would become
it was like 10
naked.
years ago.
Everyone's like 40 degrees, 40 degrees.
No, it was on when I first came here and we were going, but that is the stunt to try and get like viewership, right? And so, but what's happened then is that, please write down, this is why there tends to be more soft news stories than hard news stories, because, and this is leading to what Mr. Peters is going to say in a second. So you want to see more Miley Cyrus because more people are going to watch it. Then you're going to hear about Syria or the big downer in the super typhoon in the Philippines, right? So, and that's unfortunate because you're being given the news you want to hear, not what you need to hear, right? So this is why you have to be really consciously seeking out hard news, because of advertising, you're not going to get it as much because people want to have like more viewers.
And this really makes a difference. I mean, all of this is just academic, right? It's interesting. Ooh, I understand how the media works. But the really important thing to understand is this really affects what news you are presented with. It affects when the news is presented to you. It affects how the news is presented to you. And if you look at cable news in the United States, it's a great example. They love disasters, crisis, some kind of deadlock in the government. They thrive on that because when was the best day in CNN's entire history is 9/11. It's the worst day in American history, recent American history.
What about Newtown?
Okay.
No, but you're the same
Newtown
sort of
was
thing.
just as bad.
It's
Like
the same
you
sort
have
of
a
thing.
theme song. Like I'm going to talk about this more, but like you have people on your network to make up a theme song for the story, so that you in the kitchen you hear the song and then you run in and see the Boston bombing. The Boston bombing had a
It's
theme
another
song.
one, right?
They all like Hurricane Katrina, like all of the big disasters. They probably already have a super typhoon theme song, right? So again,
I mean, when stuff like this happens, in some ways, I don't want to make these people seem worse than they actually are, but in some ways, when stuff like this happens, people in the 24-hour news business, that's the best day of their entire lives, because people are going to be tuned in for 24 hours to see this disaster unfold, or what's going to happen with this, that, and the other thing. And they have an interest in making small things seem like crises to try and convince people to tune in. So this whole, like, American government is shutting down nonsense. In the end, the government shut down and actually nothing happened. But in the days leading up, well, nothing happened, but the sky didn't fall. I mean, life kept on going, the globe kept on turning. But leading up to that happening, it was all doom and gloom on the 24-hour news. Tune in to see what happens. We have the countdown in 11 hours and 58 minutes. The government is going to shut down. What's going to happen? Tune in to find out. You know, it's in their interest to make, minor things seem major, because that makes you want to tune in, because otherwise the world's going to collapse or whatever.
is there an example that's happened to you where you were kind of addicted to watch the news coverage of a particular story? Newtown was too sad for me to watch. Like I didn't want to.
I read it online first, and then I didn't know if it was true or not because it wasn't first published in CNN. It was just in some random news place, and then it was on the radio. People started covering it, and so.
Boston bombings, I couldn't get enough of it. Everything I was like, and I was like, I could feel myself being sucked in. And they kept on saying things in error because they were all like tweets and Facebook and whatever. And they arrested the Saudi guy.
Yeah.
It was so bad, like how social media didn't work. In terms of reporting that story.
I feel like
And it was like hysteria. The whole city shut down, and millions of people.
There was a big argument on Facebook with the South Twitter posted like people are focusing so much on Boston bombing, but what about the people who are dying in Afghanistan? There was this huge debate underneath it, which was sort of annoying because give people like a day to recover from this. Like, don't start an argument straight away. This is a tragedy.
Yente?
Well, when I'm like addicted to like following something, it's probably like when the World Cup or Euro Cup is on.
Right.
I watch like
yes.
the whole day.
Yeah,
and
yeah.
I watch like when the games are on, I try to watch like 4 games at the same time.
I mean, that's similar too, right? The media really hypes that up because it's ratings time. World Cup, people are watching TV 24/7 all over the world to get news about that. The Olympics is another great one where the media really ramps up because guess what? Media companies, you know how much money they pay for the rights to broadcast the Olympics? They outbid other networks with billion-dollar bids. So when the Olympics comes around, it's like, you better believe we're going to put it on 24 hours a day.
Awards season.
Eva, you want
Yeah, all of that stuff.
Yeah, it's not necessarily I was glued to the TV, but I also write about it here. When our old president was still independent, it was on the news all the time.
Yeah,
right?
Klaus, yeah.
But now that Zeman was drunk and most of the real official and important things, basically no news.
But no
comes
one
out.
knows
Yeah,
that
I'd
they
say
did that.
people know about
I mean,
it.
everyone knows about it, but it was never really.
Yeah, 'cause that was like an international joke. By the way, he wasn't stealing it. That's what the diplomats do. They take pens all the time. But anyways, that was what he was even more
I
funny.
mean, I'm
that
from
they were saying
Toronto.
it
My
wrong.
mayor smokes crack. I mean, and look,
And threatens to kill people.
well, and the news loves this guy. This is the best thing that ever happened to news in Canada. News in Canada is generally a pretty boring proposition. It's Canada, right? So when this guy comes around, it's the best day in the world for news people. They're like, oh my god, and comedians and news people love this guy, right?
Liz?
So like Russia, I don't really watch Russian TV as much. But like there was this bus crash I think somewhere in like that part of Russia
Yeah.
that no one cares about. And
Holy cow, okay,
I
right.
know, like
Yeah, yeah.
that's literally the part that no one cares about. I'm not gonna seriously, I'm not kidding. No one cares about it.
Liz, listen to the bias of what you're saying. But anyways, just say your
but
story.
but like that's what the news showed because I'm saying that because something with the Sochi Olympics that also no one cares about happened.
Holy absolutes that you're using that we're going to talk about later. But
A
anyway,
lot
yeah.
of people, like not a lot of. It's,
Okay,
it's
your
like
point is,
covered
Liz.
International, and that they covered the Olympics more than the bus crash. Even though that was like one of
Yes.
the biggest
Not
tragedies.
true.
Yes.
Sure.
Okay, different networks. Okay, we can push on.
Absolutely. But you're right. All over the world, there are different things that people report on.
We
Or
didn't write down web analytics.
Russians.
Thank you.
Right.
Everyone, please write down web analytics.
the last point on this, right? Because companies are very interested in advertising to specific groups, like we've already talked about. The difference with the digital world today, as I'm sure you know, because I'm sure you've heard me blah, blah, blah about it 100 times, Google knows a lot about you when you're surfing. So that allows Google to sell very specific ads, like tampon ads or whatever, to the appropriate people. It's such an improvement in the digital age about them building a profile of you and advertising to a very specific set of people. That's something that's really changed. And advertisers love it because they get to advertise to very specific people. That's web analytics. Web analytics is analyzing internet traffic in order to produce better results with your advertising or with your show or with something else. It's about analyzing web data. And you can be real precise with it.
If you think about the fact that they customize their ads, they can say, I want this to go to anybody who meets this criteria. And then they can actually pay for the amount of times it actually went to a single person, rather than saying, I'm going to put this at 1025, and whoever it goes to, I pay this flat amount. You really could say, well, it only reached 20 people, so I only have to pay to advertise this 20 times. I mean, it's that specific. Who actually got this ad and who didn't?
And that's why Facebook was like sort of the cutting edge also on that as well. Because if you say you like, that's directly the web analytics. So they said Facebook is the best thing that ever happened to advertising because it's like you don't have to do exactly what you said.
I
You
mean-
pinpoint exactly the ads that you want.
You guys have heard this. I mean, it's so precise that Google and Facebook are giving you advertisements with your friends' faces on it. I mean, that's how specific it is. It's an advertisement with your wife's face on it. You know, how much more personalized can it
Or
get?
it's like when on Facebook you go through your newsfeed and it's like, two of your friends like this page,
Yes,
and
right.
you
Yes,
should
exactly.
check it out.
Exactly.
Exactly.
Does Wikipedia get its money from ads as well?
No.
No,
Wikipedia
that's
is
the big
non-profit.
Don't you remember when it had a black day?
Yeah.
Yeah.
And then that was when they said we don't want to have to turn to
Yeah,
advertising.
then it says like if you each donate like.
But that was really hard because no one's going to donate. I mean, not very many people did
Not to
donate, right?
Yeah.
So, but Okay, so I'm good for you. Wow, that's good. Okay, this is more
They're,
Miley
they're
Cyrus.
a great organization. Anyways, moving right on.
But no, Cyrus.
No, we wanted to talk about Miley Cyrus and CNN. So as if we were psychically connected, here it is. So this is
smoking weed.
this is an
Oh, okay, it's going.
this is an article
that's the
about
one I
the
was-
VMA performance,
Roman.
the Video Music Awards, right? This is the big twerking evening,
Oh
right?
God.
So
Guys, you have lots
you'll have to be patient.
You have to
This
make
is-
it bigger.
This is a little bit long,
But it's very important.
So
So the
funny.
main points are here.
but I believe actually almost everything you need to understand about how advertising and news works these days, you can find in this article. Just the understanding, not necessarily the particular facts, but just the general how things work. So, this is, let me explain why Miley Cyrus's VMA performance was our top story this morning, by Meredith Artley, managing editor of CNN.com. This appeared in The Onion.
The Onion.
If you know The Onion, you'll know what this is all about. Okay, so, over the years, CNN.com has become a news website that many people turn to for top-notch reporting. Every day it's visited by millions of people, all of whom rely on the worldwide leader in news, that's our slogan, for the most crucial up-to-date information on current events. So, you may ask, why was this morning's top story, a spot usually given to the most important foreign or domestic news of the day, headline, Miley Cyrus did what? And accompanied by the subheading, Twerks Stuns at VMAs. It's a good question. The answer is pretty simple. It was an attempt to get you to click on CNN.com so that we could drive up our web traffic, which in turn would allow us to increase our advertising revenue. There was nothing, and I mean nothing, about that story that related to the important news of the day, the chronicling of significant human events, or the idea that journalism itself can be a force for positive change in the world. For Christ's sakes, there was an accompanying story with the headline, Miley's Shocking Moves. In fact, putting that story front and center was actually doing, if anything, a disservice to the public. And come to think of it, probably a disservice to the hundreds of thousands of people dying in Syria, those suffering from the current unrest in Egypt, or hell, even people who just wanted to read about the 50th anniversary of Martin Luther King's I Have a Dream speech. But boy, oh boy, did it get us some web traffic. Which is why I, Meredith Artley, managing editor of CNN.com, put the story in our top spot. Those of us watching on Google Analytics saw the number of homepage visits skyrocket the second we put up that salacious image of Miley Cyrus dancing half nude on the VMA stage. But here's where it gets great. We don't just do a top story on the VMA performance and call it a day. No. We also throw in a slideshow called The Evolution of Miley, which, for those of you that don't know, is just a way for you to mindlessly click through 13 more photos of Miley Cyrus. If we can get 500,000 of you to do that, well, 500,000 multiplied by 13 means we can get 6.5 million page views on that slideshow alone. Throw in another slideshow called 6 Don't Miss VMA Moments, and it's starting to look like a pretty goddamn good Monday, numbers-wise. Also, there are 2 videos, one of the event itself, and then some BS 2-minute clip featuring our entertainment experts talking about the performance. Side note, advertisers, along with you idiots, love videos. Another side note, the Miley Cyrus story was in the same top spot we used for our 9/11 coverage. Let that sink in for just a moment. Alright, now, let's get back to why we put the story in the most coveted spot on our website, thereby saying, essentially, that Miley Cyrus's suggestive dancing is the most important thing going on in the world right now. If you clicked on the story, and all the slideshows, and all the other VMA coverage, that means you've probably been on CNN.com for more than 7 minutes, which lowers our overall bounce rate.
Let's take a pause here. Please write down. So the key point is that you're seeing page views, and then we were seeing bounce rate.
Yeah.
So raw page views is a thing that for ad rates, and then now bounce rate. You want to explain bounce rate?
Do you know what that is?
Yep.
Sorry for getting a little technical here. The bounce rate is the percentage of visitors to a particular website who navigate away from the site after viewing only one page. If we can keep that bounce rate low and show companies that people don't just go to CNN.com, but stay there, then we can go to Ford and McDonald's or Samsonite or whatever big company you can think of and ask for the big bucks. So there are 2 measurements there, right guys? There's the visiting of the website, and there's also how long you stay on that one particular website. That obviously is important to advertisers, because that's longer eyes on the ads. More chance you're actually going to read it. Okay. So, as managing editor of CNN.com, I want readers to know this. All you are to us, and all you will ever be to us, are eyeballs. The more eyeballs on our content, the more cash we can ask for. Period. So, if we're able to get more eyeballs, that means I've done my job, which gets me congratulations from my bosses, which encourages me to put up even more stupid BS on the homepage.
Soft news.
Soft news. I don't hesitate to call it stupid BS, or soft news if you'd rather, because we all know it's stupid BS. We all know it, and you know it. We also know that you are probably dumb enough, or bored enough, or both, to click on the stupid BS anyways, and that you will continue to do so for as long as we keep putting it in front of your big idiot faces. You want to know how many more page views the Miley Cyrus thing got than our article on the wildfires ravaging Yosemite? Like 6 gazillion more. That's on you, not us. So I think that makes an interesting point about whose job is it to demand better content. I mean, CNN is just giving us what we are clicking on. So if we want better, we ought to click on better things.
Yes.
That's just a little aside. Okay.
Key point.
To be sure, I could have argued that Miley Cyrus's performance merited the top spot on our website because it was significant in terms of what's happening in the world of pop culture. Or that her over-the-top theatrics are worth covering because they are somehow representative of the lengths to which performers must go to stand out in the current entertainment landscape. But who are we kidding? Truth be told, anything at last night's VMAs, short of Lady Gaga beheading Will Smith with a broadsword, belongs tucked away in our entertainment section, far from the homepage, far from the top spot, and far from the eyes of anyone who logged onto our site this morning to see what was actually happening in the world. But then, not nearly as many people would have seen it, which wouldn't have gotten us the page views we want, which wouldn't get us the money we want, which wouldn't get me the congratulations I want. So, you see, there's no stopping this. And what is this, you ask? Modern day journalism. And what is modern day journalism? Getting you to click on this link.
So can you please write down about news management compared to like the news management you read about, which was like the wire editor or the owner, the manager? No, it's on the
It's
it's on his PowerPoint. So that's
Oh,
it.
okay.
But the key point that now that Mr. Peters has said before about news management today is now click, read, and stay, right? So that they're going to put the story, news management, like deciding which stories are going to make it or not. That's what your Cornell notes were about, right? It was the wire editor and the assignment editor and the owner and the manager. But now it is it's the stories that are going to make you click, read, and stay, right? That ends up being why there's more soft news, right? Not just on newspapers, not just on television, which we were talking about before, but also on the internet. So as Mr. Peters very aptly said, you have to make a conscious choice. When I open up my Yahoo email and I see all those crap stories, I consciously don't open them. I don't click on what's trending now, right? Because I want to consciously make a choice to say we need to have better stories out there.
And just think of the difference. You guys have already learned a little bit about Pulitzer, right? And the philosophy of journalism that he talked about was like doing good in the world, holding people in power accountable for their actions. That's a whole important philosophy. The free press is really, really essential to how our democracies run. People need to be informed if they're going to vote properly. So Pulitzer, his vision of journalism fits that. This vision of journalism, to me, leaves a little bit to be desired in terms of giving you guys the information you need to be citizens, to vote properly, to know what's what in the world.
Roman, what's the onion?
Yeah, what is the onion?
Is fake
Yeah.
news website that is that parodies news from other websites and makes stories about websites.
And so how many of you believe that was true? That really was the CNN editor?
Maybe the first couple paragraphs.
Yes? But regardless, it's like the Daily Show. Speaks the truth, but it's like not the real person who's saying it, but it still is basically true, right? Because we all know people who work in these organizations.
The reason I wanted to show you this partly was because they do make a lot of excellent points. Whoever wrote it, it wasn't Meredith Hartley, but whoever wrote it does have specialist insider knowledge of how these decisions are made in the newsroom. The other reason I thought this was an interesting thing to show you is a lot of people, Americans in particular, Canadians too, get a lot of their information from comedians these days. The Daily Show, they do studies on this. a lot of university-age people in the United States get all their news, or a lot of their news, from The Daily Show or The Colbert Report or places like The Onion. And some of the analysis is good. I think this is an awesome piece. You'd hate that to be the only place you get your news, but, you know.
Because in the end, this is even more truthful than actual CNN.
And I think this is why a lot of people are turning to comedians, right, for their news. We trust our conventional news less than we used to. And so it's not a stretch to say, I would rather listen to Jon Stewart than Fox News. That isn't a stretch at all.
Write it down, Emma, just look at we have 15 minutes and the share has something
Yeah,
to
sorry.
do. So awesome.
I
Social
do go
media.
on.
Please write down social media.
Oh, sorry, I'm
Just
largely...
write it, Emma, just write it down and we'll come back to it. Social media, everybody write down now.
Okay, so we talked about the 4 traditional types of media. Social media is the newest idea of a media source. And just, we're going to watch a little bit of a video. The link is here on the slide. I encourage you on your own to watch all of it. It does a really good job of setting up how social media is changing how we get news. All right?
Clay Shirky.
Clay Shirky, is the person doing this. He talks a lot about kind of the sharing and the interaction on the internet. But we're going to watch just a small part of this.
It's happening everywhere and moving from one spot to another. That is a huge transformation. Not to put too fine a point on the moment we're living through, the moment our historical generation is living through, is the largest increase in expressive capability in human history. Now, that's a big claim. I'm going to try and back it up. There are only 4 periods in the last 500 years where media has changed enough to qualify for the label revolution. The first one is the famous one, the printing press. Movable type, oil-based inks, that whole complex of innovations that made printing possible and turned Europe upside down starting in the middle of the 1400s. Then, a couple of hundred years ago, there was innovation in 2-way communication, conversational media. First the telegraph, then the telephone. Slow, text-based conversations, then real-time, voice-based conversations. Then, about 150 years ago, there was a revolution in recorded media other than print. First photos, then recorded sound, then movies, all encoded into physical objects. And finally, about 100 years ago, the harnessing of electromagnetic spectrum to send sound and images through the air, radio and television. This is the media landscape as we knew it in the 20th century. This is what those of us of a certain age grew up with and are used to. But there's a curious asymmetry here. The media that's good at creating conversations is no good at creating groups, and the media that's good at creating groups is no good at creating conversations. If you want to have a conversation in this world, you have it with one other person. If you want to address a group, you get the same message and you give it to everybody in the group, whether you're doing that with a broadcasting tower or a printing press. That was the media landscape as we had it in the 20th century. And this is what changed. This thing that looks like a peacock hit a windscreen is Bill Cheswick's map of the internet. He traces the edges of the individual networks and then color codes them. The internet is the first medium in history that has native support for groups and conversation at the same time. Whereas the phone gave us the one-to-one pattern, and television, radio, magazines, books gave us the one-to-many pattern. The internet gives us the many-to-many pattern. Right? For the first time, media is natively good at supporting these kinds of conversations. That's one of the big changes. The second big change, right, is that as all media gets digitized, the internet also becomes the mode of carriage for all other media.
All of the
phone calls
mediums
migrate to the
are on
internet,
the internet.
magazines migrate to the internet, movies migrate to the internet.
All of the
And
mediums
that
are on
means
the internet.
that every medium is right next door to every other medium. Right? Put another way, media is increasingly less just a source of information, and is increasingly more a site of coordination. Because groups that see or hear or watch or listen to something can now gather around and talk to each other as well. And the third big change, right, is that members of the former audience, as Dan Gilmore calls them, can now also be producers and not consumers. Every time a new consumer joins this media landscape, a new producer joins as well, because the same equipment, phones, computers, let you consume and produce. It's as if when you bought a book, they threw in the printing press for free. It's like you had a phone that could turn into a
Emma
radio
and
if you
TiVo.
pressed the right
It's
buttons.
not just journalists
That is a
producing.
huge change in the media landscape we're used to. And it's not just internet or no internet. Right? We've had the internet in its public form for almost 20 years now. And it's still changing as the media becomes more social. It's still changing patterns, even among groups who know how to deal with the internet well. Second story. Last
We're gonna
May,
stop there.
China in the Sichuan province.
Okay, so a couple big ideas that I want to take out of this. Yes, everybody, all the different sources are together, but what's happening when all of the traditional media sources come to the internet is they're trying to take advantage of the social aspect, right? All of them, we visited a lot of their websites, they are encouraging discussion, right? People can have discussion and comments in there. They are accepting feedback. You can communicate with them. In fact, they're looking through social media, things like Twitter, Facebook, to get sources, to find out information that might make a good story. They're using that social media themselves to help them.
Can I add actually to the
Yep.
definition? That used to happen with letters to the editor, right? That if you wanted to comment, right, and if you wanted to have a conversation, but it takes a long time, right? That was in your reading. But your definition, Mike, last class, about what the definition of social media is sharing information with no clear intermediaries. And it's immediately, that's what I would want to ask. So you used to have letters to the editor, so you can communicate, you can have a conversation, but it took too long. So
And
again, the definition of social media would be sharing information with others with no intermediaries. Yenta, writing it down, you gotta write this down, Alex. No one in
Nobody in
between,
between.
no editor saying this letter's to the
Right.
editor is gonna go there or not, but it happens immediately now. So versus it took at least 24 hours if you wrote a letter to the editor for a newspaper, than for you to have a conversation with somebody.
And the main difference with letters to the editor is they don't all get published. The editor chooses which one gets published and which one doesn't, or maybe none get published. Nobody really controls what happens in the comments, although that's changing a little bit. YouTube is adding more control over the comment section. Because, right, and also because I'm sure if you're on the internet very much, you know what kind of distasteful stuff can often go down inside comment sections, particularly in YouTube. There's a lot of homophobic crap, a lot of racist stuff, so this reflects poorly on people's corporate image. So again, this is a whole money-making thing. It's not like necessarily they really care about racism or homophobia. It just reflects badly on their corporate image, and they don't want that associated with YouTube. I mean, I'm sure there are people at Google that also hate that kind of stuff also, but again, it's a business decision. You don't want people to think of YouTube as the place where racists hang out. I mean, that is not something you want as part of your corporate brand.
Okay,
Unless you're Chick-fil-A. That's a whole different thing altogether.
so if we say that they're trying to become more social, it's not the same thing as social media. So you have sort of a definition here. Can somebody give me examples of what is social media? What are social media groups that you're a part of? Yeah. What do you participate in? Yeah. Anybody?
Email? Twitter.
Okay, email is not quite the same thing, but yes, Twitter is, Facebook, Tumblr. Okay, so let's talk about what that means. In that sense, in a social media, I exist and I reach out and make connections with others, right? First with my immediate friends. I connect with them. Then, maybe friends of friends. And then maybe an organization that other people I know are involved with and I think, oh, I'd be interested in that, so I connect there. Or somebody I start paying attention to and I like what they're saying, so I connect there. Pretty soon, your connection is far beyond your immediate knowledge, right? You start to hear things from all sorts of people. For example, on Twitter, there's a couple of groups I follow that are all about education. And I know they're very interested in it, and they talk about it, and they report a lot, and I find their opinion important. So I follow them. Or I follow young adult authors, because I think they're interesting and that it relates to my. The idea of social media to work effectively is that we have that communication that goes far, far away. And it's not just about the people we would normally have a face-to-face conversation with. Right? Can we agree on that? So that's what social media is. All right. So we're starting to get information recommended to us from people we don't necessarily know, from contacts. We can get our information. We could go to New York Times and get it to the website or to the paper. We could go to places like Flipboard, which is an app that you can customize what you like and it pulls information and brings it to you. You can get an RSS feed, podcasts. And the difference is some of these sources are very social, things your friends or people you know recommend to you. Some are more professional. Somebody else is evaluating what's the important news and you're gathering it. These are two different ways to get information. How many of you click on links that your friends post in social media? Maybe a video, maybe an article. That's right. So you're taking in information because some of your friends recommended it to you and you trust them or it looks interesting. So we're talking about how we curate knowledge in the future. So you have this kind of option. Am I taking information from my friends?
Content curation. Right? Content curation, write down
Hashtag content curation.
People, it's on the board.
No, you're right. I mean,
So if some of it is social, based on people I like or trust, and some of it is professional, somebody out there who has judgment and I trust their judgment, and maybe they're journalists, maybe they're professionals in information management, something like that. Whether you're taking the kind of professional or social interaction.
On Twitter, people usually follow like celebrities, because most celebrities on Twitter to find out like, I don't know,
What they're
album
doing.
releases or there's like Twitter wars stuff, which gives the
Okay,
like,
sorry,
stuff.
just a 5 minutes.
Talk about the reliability of.
Okay, so now we have to decide how do we decide if it's reliable or quality, because lots of
Key
stuff is
point.
posted by people just like you.
They're not trained in journalism schools or whatever like that. They're just saying what they see. Maybe it's truthful, maybe it's not.
Right. So, all sorts of stuff available on the internet. How do you determine what you think is reliable or quality information? Yeah.
First, there should be no spelling mistakes.
Okay, so some obvious visual cues.
And
What else?
also, if you compare it, maybe if it's something you've already heard of and see the fact to respond.
Okay, so the question is, do you do that extra step to evaluate content that you find online?
If it's something really important, like a huge event, something really serious, I do. But if it's just like stupid stuff, like a cat jumped out of a window and landed fine on the ground.
Well, we talked.
Okay, I don't understand two of the comments you made. So first of all, about spelling mistakes. If somebody's in Trevera Square and they're saying, my husband just got killed by the military and it was spelled wrong, does that mean that didn't happen?
I'm
No.
saying,
So
like,
no, let me
articles.
just finish. And so I would disagree with you about this. But I want to put in the counter argument. So I want you to think about that spelling, if you're looking for a primary source, which we're going to be talking about, maybe not, if they're not writing. Thibaut, can you stop talking? If they're not writing in their native language. But a very important point is that for you to be critical thinkers, like iReport that started on CNN a couple of years ago, there was a story that there was somebody saying, this is happening in Syria right now, and everyone's like, oh my God. And then somebody went, that didn't happen that day, because that bridge was blown up a year ago. And they went, oh. And then people started to go, is everything that's coming out of Trevera Square really happening? And then people started to go, so now the Philippines, right? All this stuff that's happening that's coming out of the Philippines, you have to start to be, I liked your second point, which is compare it to other sources, and then you start to make an evaluation. So that's the key thing you need to write down, which I mentioned last week before we went away for soccer. You look at multiple sources to try to find the truth.
And we talked, just as an example, of the Coney thing that happened a couple years ago.
Right? Remember you was in my middle school, you guys were like crazy fanatic Lord of the Flies, like, oh no! Like you're all putting your like posters everywhere, right? Send money! You know, and then I wrote to Mr. Hawkins when we found out like a day later, like, that organization that your middle school is trying to raise money for is not like particularly reputable. Like, he's like, God, they're so enthusiastic, we'll just like, let it go a little bit longer, and it was, right? Because people didn't look it up, right?
Wait, what point of
Because
this?
they
We'll talk about the
only,
money.
they only believe
It was this
the
thing.
About the guy.
Exactly.
Something like that.
So you were
little
duped.
children, like,
And but then the guy took out to be like some like the old like.
No, it wasn't reliable.
But just a last point
Again
for
to
you.
Alex, we'll talk about it after.
There's a lot we could discuss here. There is, but a point for you to take forward is that every time you are now producers, you're posting stuff, you're forwarding stuff, you're sharing, you're liking, you're doing all sorts of things that push things to your friends on social networks. And it looks like you're recommending this. I recommend this, I liked this, I shared this. Remember that then you're in fact a producer at that level. You're sending out that sort of curation, that here you're my friend, I recommend this to other people. And people will trust you, think what you like must be good, and follow that link to other information. And it's important that you feel you can stand behind the kind of information you push out through your social networks.
I mean, yeah, we have to build that kind of social trust with each other, since we can't necessarily rely on these authority figures to vet this stuff for us anymore. We have to rely on each other, and each and every one of you have to be able to stand by the information that you share. And you know what? Maybe that means you have to think twice before you share stuff. Because if you're sharing news that isn't true, you're part of the problem, not the solution, right?
Very important. Very important point. So first of all, let's thank Mr. Chief and Mrs. Chair for their efforts. Great job. Now listen what your homework is. Yenta, Roman, focus, you guys. Listen, Liz, is that before you had to get current events that had said that you were going to look at the bias of the corporation, who owned it, and then that kind of thing. But tonight what you're going to do is try and find one story, like for example the super typhoon in Philippines. And you're going to look at each of the mediums that they went over. Television, radio, newspapers, magazines. And I want you to try and see how the nature of the medium is changing the story. So not the bias of who owns it or the reporter, but the nature of the medium themselves, how that story is different in a TV story versus a radio story because of the nature of how they have to broadcast that information. And I would really like to encourage you. You can get all of them on the internet, as Clay Shirky said. I'd like for you to try, if you have a television, to watch television, or turn on the radio, or pick up a newspaper in the library that Ms. Cher has, or a magazine. I'd like you to also maybe look at that. Snowden, because you have magazines from a week ago. Snowden is a good example of that's still on in multiple forums.
I don't even know who he is anymore.
In Russia.
Oh my gosh! Like last week in Budapest. Russia Today, that's all they were talking about. That's like the #1 story all day is about Edward Snowden. Roman.
Does that have to be a current event?
Something in the last 2 weeks. So that's.
And to be able to compare all the options.
All 4. I want you to see all 4 so you get a. I'm going to talk about it next day. You're testing this later.